So good evening again, or maybe good morning or good afternoon, depending on your time zone, as I just found out that Cindy is there and it's midday where you are, so maybe you want to mention then. So welcome to our last episode of Thriving Thursdays, Multilingualism Matters, before the summer break. So if you're new here, I wanted to know that this is a project of SIETAR Austria, the Society for Intercultural Education, Training and Research. My name is Karen and I'm the host for this Expert Talks series. If you want to find out more about SIETAR, you can visit our website, sietar.at. And also please feel free to contact us if you have questions, suggestions for our future talks, whatever. We agreed that we're going to record this session, so it's going to be available on YouTube later on. And one more thing before we start, we plan 1 hour for this meeting because it's kind of a celebration before the summer break. And we have time for questions. And I was just talking to our guest. She would like you to ask questions while she's talking. So feel free to switch on your camera, your microphone, if you want to ask anything related to this topic. So what is the topic? A very interesting topic. We're going to learn about language learning habits during COVID-19. So in a year like no other, with our special guest, Cindy Blanco. Dr. Cindy Blanco, thank you very much for accepting our invitation. And welcome to SIETAR Austria. So I'm going to introduce you shortly. So Dr. Cindy Blanco is a senior learning scientist at Duolingo. I'm sure everybody knows what Duolingo is, this special app for language learning, and it's well known around the world. So you work there to develop effective teaching products based on language learning research. I know you studied linguistics and languages. You also have a master in Spanish. So, enhorabuena, perfecto. And you also have a PhD in linguistics, a postdoctoral research experience in cognitive psychology. So many different fields coming together in a very interesting way. I know your academic research focused on language acquisition, but also bilingualism, phonetics. And also you studied language learning in infants, in children and adults. And so many interesting things. So dear Cindy, I don't want to talk too much. I just welcome you once again. And whenever you're ready, you can share your screen.
Yeah, thank you so much, Karen, for the introduction and the invitation, and to SIETAR Austria also for this program and for this kind of celebration at the end. As Karen mentioned, I'd like to emphasize that I'd love for this to be like casual and collaborative. This is not the kind of research study where there's like a particular conclusion at the end. So if we land on a slide that everyone is interested in and we never get any further, that's okay. You know, I'm excited to talk about this data with all of you. So definitely interrupt, stop me, you know, write in the chat if you'd like, yes. And you will guide this. I have lots of ideas, but you will guide it. So I'm going to share my screen. Yeah, so as Karen mentioned, I am a senior learning scientist at Duolingo. My background is, of course, in language science, but because of my interest in bilingualism and my work in experimental research, I get to do some fun kinds of research at Duolingo. And so one of the projects that I've worked on is this global study of language learning trends, and that's what I'll be sharing with you today. I have my email here if you'd like to get in touch or you have follow-up questions, definitely feel free to reach out. I'm going to start with a quick ad for Duolingo a little bit. Duolingo is opening an office in Berlin, and you might be the right kind of audience to know someone who would be a great fit for a learning scientist at our Berlin office. If you go to our jobs page, you can see the full post, but this is looking for someone who is an expert researcher and someone thinking about language, whether it's from psychology or applied linguistics. That is the only part of the ad that I'll be doing in the talk today. but I thought I'd take advantage of your connection.
Yes, of course.
Yeah. Maybe in the last few years is kind of what Duolingo is now. So we have over 500 million learners around the world. And last year we surpassed 40 million what we call monthly active learners. So at least 40 million people a month are completing some amount of language learning in the app. We have 103 courses in 40 languages. So the courses, and some of this is important for the data that we'll talk about. The courses are what we call directional. So there's not a single English course. It's an English course for Spanish speakers and an English course for German speakers, an English course for French speakers. And so in total, we have 103 courses in 40 languages. All of the content on Duolingo is totally free, so all of the courses are free. We do have a paid subscription program, but it's to like avoid seeing ads and some gamification things. It's all the content itself is freely available. And our biggest courses are CEFR aligned. This is probably not a group that I need to explain what the CEFR is. In the US, we use a different standard typically, but we as a company adopt the CEFR standard.
Maybe just briefly, I see there are some students here. Yes,
okay.
is this model to qualify the level, to determine the level of the language knowledge, right? The language competence, just very, very briefly.
Yeah. So this is the Common European Framework of Reference for Languages, and it allows us, just like Karen said, to kind of decide, are you an early learner, are you intermediate? And so you might have heard these labels of like A1 language, or have you reached C1 or C2? So those are those CFR levels. And so the CFR has a program of guidelines for developing language courses and evaluating language proficiency, and we use that at Duolingo as well. And so you can see on the right just an example of, this is for Spanish speakers. These are the languages available to Spanish speakers.
Wow, what a neat. Wow.
Yeah, so something that's interesting about the 40 languages is that there are 37 of them available from English. So if you know English, there are 37 different languages, but there's some that are different. And so in the Spanish course, you have to be a Spanish speaker, or you have to know Spanish in order to take our Catalan course or our Guarani course. And I'll mention there's a couple of interesting data points that I discovered about those two languages. We'll touch on.
Can I just interrupt you with the first question, Cindy?
Yeah, I told you it's okay if we don't even make it to the end.
Let's do it very interactive. Yes, I was wondering how you choose these languages. I mean, are you doing like surveys to participants and asking like, hey, what's the next language you want to learn?
Yeah, so there have been a lot of different models of course creation, and maybe about 4 or 5 years ago, we did do a survey of learners ranking their language interests, and so that spurred us in the creation of our Finnish course. In 2020, we released our Finnish course, and so that was one of these like fan favorites. So even though Finnish is a pretty small language, if we think of the number of native speakers, on a global scale, it is really, I don't know, language learners are really, really interested in Finnish, probably for some language typology reasons, that it's so unusual compared to other European languages that people might have more experience with. But we also think about like the value of courses in a couple of different ways. And so, of course, like it's really valuable to have a French course for English speakers because French is a really popular language. It's spoken as an official or national language all around the world, and literally dozens of countries. But there's other ways that we think about value as well. And so I think the Guarani course is a good example, or we also teach like Hawaiian and Irish, that we have this commitment to teaching some endangered or understudied or underrepresented languages. And even though we know we'll never have the number of Guarani learners that we have in any of our French courses, there's like a different value in representing some of these other languages. And so in the short term, I expect that most of the new languages we'll be adding in the next couple of years will be from this bucket of underrepresented, endangered languages. You'll be seeing more of those.
Wonderful. Yes, great. Our president of SIETAR Austria, Mrs. Ethnic Knapich, is here, and she was just very excited because you mentioned Irish, and she's Irish, so that's great.
Yeah, so I know that there's an Irish, and I was delighted that there's also Irish, because it's one of the languages that I wanted the kids also to sign up to, because we're in an Austrian context with not very much opportunity to learn it. So fantastic.
That's great. So I have some really great Irish factoids later. And I don't want to, I'm saying things that are already on like my very last slide, but I think what you're saying about learning Irish in this really, this context that is so far from Irish speakers or Irish language, Irish community, what are ways that we as language researchers, language enthusiasts, language learners can provide more support? You know, that's really hard, but you're not the only person trying to teach kids in that kind of context. So Duolingo is a kind of support, but there's a lot more that we as a language community can be doing to support these kinds of languages. Great, okay.
Great.
Yeah. So this is just the real quick foundation so you know what we're talking about, that the Duolingo course, this is how it looks now. And so if you're someone who maybe dabbled in Duolingo like 7 years ago, things are very different now. And basically you work through these colorful bubbles, we call them skills. You work through these skills, all these different lessons on different communicative topics. And you have to complete all of the first level in order to like unlock the next set of content. And so you kind of work down through the course. You can repeat content and do harder exercises in the content. So you can see this person's at level 3 here they're at level 2. And our biggest courses have other kinds of tools. So there's a stories feature with learner-directed short stories. There's audio lessons and podcasts and conversation lessons that our biggest courses have kind of like a full package of other kinds of language content. And so we, the company, think of these courses as combining like learning science and pedagogy. Right, that's the side that I live on. With machine learning, like optimizing courses to individuals. And of course, Duolingo is really known for gamification. Again, like if you haven't seen it in a while, this is how things look now. We lean a lot on scaffolding in our courses. So the early levels do a lot more of these like word bank exercises, translating kind of in the easier direction from the new language to your own language. But eventually you are doing more listening and more writing and speaking in the target language, the language you're studying. And here you can also see some audio lessons and these little stories in the bigger courses. So as I said, we have 500 million learners on Duolingo. They're located in every country on earth. They're in these 103 courses over 40 languages, which means we have so much information kind of in an unprecedented way about what people want to study, what they are studying, their learning patterns and behaviors. And so the goal of this project was to dig into that data and figure out what is going on. You know, we get a lot of information sometimes on a country by country basis, or it's limited to maybe secondary schools. And it's naturally limited by course offerings, right? We can only say so much about what secondary school students want to learn based on what is offered. And so looking at our data gives a different kind of perspective on what the language learning landscape looks like around the world. And so I'm going to talk just briefly about like what the data look like.
Yes,
yeah, okay, yes. So, right, like I said, we have learners in every country. The way we define country just for the data purposes is by like the governing body. So for the UK results, when I'm saying UK, I mean the UK Virgin Islands, I also mean Scotland, I mean Northern Ireland, kind of that governing body. We did also break the data down further, but what you'll see now is based on this, like this idea of a governing body. I'll be talking a lot about which language or languages people choose to study. And because Duolingo is totally free, there's no cost or penalty to switching languages, to leaving one and trying another. And so unlike maybe with paid language institute classes or university students who have to, very deliberately switch out of one class into another, this gives us a real sense of where people's interests lie. We also ask our learners to complete a short motivation question when they first create an account. And so we have some data about why people are reporting that they want to study a particular language. There's some interesting patterns about learning behavior. So when people study, how often they study, and we can look at change over time. So how have people's language interests changed over time, and maybe especially during the COVID-19 pandemic. I'm going to pause here to see if there are any questions before we get to the next part.
I guess you're gonna show us the reasons, right?
Yes. Oh, yeah. There's lots.
I'm dying about
okay,
curiosity.
Then let's move ahead.
Take your time. Take your time.
Okay.
Wait, sorry, just a second. I see, Sveta, you have a question, right?
Right, Cindy. So you only work with the data, which is quantitative, correct? Or do you also do the qualitative data analysis with the trends, just to understand?
Yeah. So the data that I looked at is quantitative. Mm-hmm. Yeah, we didn't have any. So we didn't collect any qualitative data, mm-hmm. But that's what I want you to do next. or I would like to do it there's so many patterns. I mean, and you don't need to explain this to qualitative researchers. There's so many patterns that I can show you with the numbers, and I can guess why that might be, but I don't have the data to back that up. And so we'll see, especially for motivations, the learners complete a short questionnaire. It's a multiple choice questionnaire. I have given you the 7 reasons, but that's not complete. And I can see from the data that that's not complete. There are more than 7 reasons to study a language. And what, one of the reasons on the questionnaire is culture. And what I might conceptualize as culture to me means something different to you, means something different to Edna's kids who are learning Irish and this other, culture can mean a lot of different things. So I would love to do more survey work, more qualitative work, directly with our learners to get more insight. I have the numbers, they've motivated lots of questions, but yeah, no, that's a fair qualification of the results.
Thank you.
Okay, Karen, we won't keep you waiting any longer. So the 4 big findings, thinking globally about global language learning trends, is that we saw a huge spike in new users in those first weeks after the first lockdown in March and April 2020. And so on the Duolingo platform, we saw kind of overnight 30 million new learners join in those first 6 weeks. March 11th, when the World Health Organization announced the pandemic, to the end of April, 30 million, which is, language learning on an app, as I think it is in the world, is seasonal in a lot of ways. So we see things become a little quieter in the summer as far as new learners, whenever the summer is, depending on hemisphere. There's a big spike around New Year's, which lots of people showing enthusiasm for starting new trends, new habits. But 30 million far surpassed anything we had seen for any of these New Year's spikes. We were used to New Year's spikes, and this was 1.5, sometimes twice as big as what we typically see for New Year's.
Wow, incredible. Ethne, you have a question, right?
So people really turn.
Sorry, I know I don't know when to interrupt what's coming.
Oh yeah, no, but, shout me down, yeah.
So I'm also dying to know, so 30 million is unbelievable. I wouldn't have guessed that. Do you also have results around the amount of time that these, comparatively the new sort of 30 million during the pandemic spent on average in comparison to maybe some of the older users?
Yeah, so what ended up happening is that the patterns for the new learners look a lot like the patterns for the older learners. And so when they first join, they spend a lot of time. And that gradually, you know, there's kind of a peak and then they plateau into what becomes their normal. And so it didn't take long for the new learners to look like the old learners, that the patterns looked really similar in terms of amount of learning. What was really different for everyone, for the new learners, for old learners, for returning learners, maybe someone who had downloaded the app years ago and came back to it, was the time of day that they studied. So before the pandemic, you would see these rises and falls throughout the day. So early in the morning, maybe during people's commute, you would see a spike in lessons. People would be doing lessons on their daily commute. And then in the mid-morning, things would drop. And that would be calm until the evening commute. And then things would pick up a little bit. And then typically after dinner, you would see a lot of learners doing lessons before bedtime. So there was spikes for the commute, spikes after dinner. And then on the weekend, there would be a dip. People would forget, or they were more likely to forget to do lessons on the weekend. So you would see this impact of a really regular schedule, Monday through Friday, and the weekends look different.
I'm thinking, sorry, yeah. I was just thinking particularly because Svetlana Buko is here as well, but I know from a European perspective, we were really interested in this whole, you know, closing of borders, and then this sort of new impetus around language learning on different sides of the borders. And I think that's really something that would be fascinating also to look at. So I imagine there's just so much data that it would be fantastic to be a researcher.
Yes, and there's, I'll show you some data. I kind of picked some countries in Europe, including Austria and Austria's neighbors, to see how language patterns change. And so I would love your insights about how border closings might have affected this, because you can see, I mean, I suspect that's what's happening in the data. The one other thing I'll say about this, this commuter pattern, this weekend pattern and the commuter pattern, is that, of course, when lockdown started, we all lost our commutes. We suddenly didn't have regular schedules, and especially in those earlier weeks, we were all scrambling to kind of figure out what our new pattern was going to be. And so you see this kind of country by country, week by week. You know, the US closed on March 16th, but the UK didn't. The UK didn't kind of officially close for a week or two later. And so you see this pattern kind of fall around the world, and that when people stopped having commutes, they stopped doing lessons early in the morning and then again after work in the evening. And instead, what you saw was a spike of language learning just before lunchtime and just before just before lunchtime and just after lunchtime, and people studying later in the day. And there was no difference between the week and the weekend, because again, thankfully it's kind of hard to remember those first weeks, but there was just no differentiation in days of the weeks as we were suddenly working from home, school from home, taking care of kids at home. And so you see this in people's study habits, that we lost schedules. And so even as far as, you know, studying a language on an app, that was part of our schedules, and we had to change that as well.
Very, very interesting, really.
So the other big find, I mean, this isn't maybe terribly surprised, but worth saying is that, you know, in our data and our numbers, we see that English is the most popular language to study around the world. That has been true for us forever, I think. And we see that Spanish is the second most popular language to study, and French is number 3. And again, that varies quite a bit depending on country. We'll look at countries later, but if you just pool everyone together, English, Spanish, and French is the order of the top languages. Something that I've loved seeing in the data is that now people are much more interested in studying a wider variety of languages. And so of course, Duolingo's course offerings get more varied as time goes on. But just because we introduce a new course doesn't mean that it'll kind of rocket to the top in any country, you know. So just because we teach Welsh or we teach Hawaiian doesn't mean that that will ever get to number 1 or number 2 in a country. But in fact, we do see that. We do see that languages far outside the traditional English, Spanish, French are getting placed first or second in different countries. People do really want to study more languages or more varied languages than they've typically had access to. And in line with that pattern, we've also seen a real rise of Asian languages all around the world, not just in Western countries or English-speaking countries, but it's kind of been happening around the globe with patterns differing in different places. But there's a real interest in Asian languages, and I mean, my assumption is that this is really closely related to culture and entertainment, whether that's music and the rise of like K-pop, but also more offerings on streaming services for, you know, Korean dramas or anime and things like that. I'm going to pause after these 4 big ones and then we'll jump in. Okay.
And sorry, could you mention one particular Asian language, or is really like a general trend?
Yeah, so, no, it's so general. So I had to pick a flag here, so I put Japanese, and so we'll see that Japanese is the has reached the 4th most popular position in the US, and it's one of the fastest growing languages in the US, but then like Brazil and Mexico are more interested in Korean. And actually Turkish has grown a lot in the US and Mexico, and maybe Brazil, I'd have to check on that, but definitely the US and Mexico. And when we look at the 5 fastest growing languages around the world, just of any language family, they're all from Asia, all 5 of the fastest growing languages. And so that includes, you know, Japanese and Korean and Chinese. It also includes Turkish, whether we want to count Turkish as from, I mean, its roots are certainly in Asia and Central Asia. But those fastest growing languages aren't, you know, English, Spanish, and French or Italian or anything like that. It's this other bucket of languages. People are interested in much more varied languages than they've had access to.
So interesting, really. Thank you.
Yes. So what I wanted to do before we get back to the global results is give like a quick window into what's happening in Austria, and you can let me know if this kind of matches your perceptions. So the top languages studied in Austria are English, Spanish, German, French, and Italian. And so on Duolingo, 27% of all learners in Austria are studying English, 17% study Spanish, and so on. What we see is that right after lockdown, this pattern changed a little bit. And we see this throughout the world that, again, starting March 11th through the end of April, when that most intense period of lockdown or that first lockdown, the most popular languages in Austria were English, Spanish, and not German, but French. And my hypothesis here is that these people who were studying German in Austria, they might have been tourists or people working or studying in Austria temporarily, and kind of when things got really difficult and scary, they were able to go back to their communities if Austria wasn't their community. And so we see this decline in many countries that, you know, Italian was ranked pretty high in Italy, and then when the lockdown happened, Italian dropped. That people tried to go back to whatever, I would say, their linguistic communities if they weren't maybe as rooted or as long-term in Austria.
I wonder, sorry, had it anything to do with also the lack of, you know, need for interaction in the language? You know, if people weren't out and about and having to interact. If I think about our international students locally, you know, maybe then there was less drive. It would be fascinating if you could, you know, get that information. Of course, not possible, but yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, that's a great point, right? And so that's where that qualitative data would really help explain. I can tell you that it happened. I believe it happened. I have the number, but why? Really, why? What motivated that? And was it the same all over? You know, I said that this pattern happened around the world, but multiple things could be motivated that. You know, in some places it could be that the tourists left, and in other places it could be related to work situations, or like you're saying, you know, people being more restricted in who they're interacting with, being really the same.
Yeah, I mean, considering Austria is a very strong tourist country, it would certainly make sense, you know, that idea of people sort of leaving less. Yeah.
Yeah. And I see that in Italy as well. I've looked at the motivation data in Italy, and there, I think it really is driven by tourists. if you think of the top courses, so remember I said that, English is the most popular language to study in Austria, but that means a lot of things. That's people who are German speakers studying English, French speakers studying English, Chinese speakers studying English, anyone who's studying English. And so I also looked at the top courses in Austria, the 5 biggest courses. And so I'll kind of talk you through this. I'm used to this notation, but it's not natural. The biggest course is for German speakers who are learning English. The second biggest course is German speakers studying Spanish. The third biggest course is English speakers studying German. The fourth biggest course is English speakers studying Spanish, and the fifth is German speakers studying French. And something that I think is happening, with like this English course for Spanish speakers, I would be surprised if this is like a lot of British expats study Spanish. I mean, that could be the case, but what I think it is that our Spanish course for English speakers has many more features. And if you are an Austrian person who has good enough English that you feel comfortable studying from English, maybe you opt to take that the version of the Spanish course that has audio lessons and the podcast and conversation lessons and things like that. Next, I looked at motivations. So overall, the 2 biggest motivators for Austrians studying on Duolingo were for school and for travel reasons.
And
yeah, no, yes.
No romance.
Oh.
That's another good reason.
Maybe maybe it's associated with the travel.
Yeah, so I wonder about this, right? So I have a different slide with all of the reasons, but the reasons that might be related to romance, I think, are stuck in culture. Like maybe that's culture, maybe it's travel, maybe it's family.
Yeah.
But none of those are as specific or as clear as romance. So if you are someone who is studying through, right, I don't have that nuance to the depth. We've talked about this at work. We know this happens, but I can't see it in depth. But then during the lockdown, of course, travel stopped being a real option for people. And so we see that in the motivations. The motivations shifted, that there was, school was about the same, but now brain training, this idea that studying a language is good for you, it keeps you engaged, or this problem solving, puzzle solving, that became the second most popular reason, and travel dropped down to third. Yes, Svetlana.
Cindy, just a quick question about the methodology.
Yes.
So the motivations, this is from the previous year before the lockdown, correct? And this is the same instrument, so you had the same identical survey, and it's basically a longitudinal study, correct?
So the way the survey works is, like the numbers that I'm showing you here for motivations, these are for learners who signed up for Duolingo between October 2019 and September 2020. So overall, what did the pattern look like? You are only given that survey when you first download the app. And so if you download the app to study English and you select school, that's what I have here. But if 2 months later you decide you want to try Esperanto, I don't know what your reason is. I only have that first reason that you provided.
All right. Thank you.
Yeah, I would interpret a lot of this as exciting motivations for future research.
Yes.
A couple other points that I looked at is the UI language, the user interface language of people in Austria. And so we see that a little more than a third of them are interacting with the app from English. So they feel confident enough in their English that they're using Duolingo or studying from English. About a third are studying from German. And then, of course, this is the bulk of everyone. This is a lot. And then, these are much smaller, and the list goes on. But there's the third most popular interface language is Arabic, and Russian, and Spanish. Austria, congratulations, you're ranked number 5th for longest streaks on Duolingo. So one of the gamification, yeah, I see everyone's really impressed. Well done,
wow.
Everyone. Duolingo has this gamification feature that the number of days in a row that you study is your streak. So if you study every day for a week, your streak is at 7 days, and it continues on like that. And so here I looked at the 90th percentile of streaks for all of the different countries, and Austria, number 5.
Oh, this is so surprising. Wow.
Do you think?
I mean, it's positive. I mean,
Yeah,
in a
wait to
positive
see-
way.
Oh, I'm excited to see your response when you see the full list. I have the list of the top 5 most dedicated. We'll see if it's great with that. I can't wait to see all your facial reactions when I show you the
Okay.
top 5. Keep your cameras on. And then I also looked at the most popular time to study. So I looked at these 1-hour intervals. When are most people doing lessons? And the 2 most popular hours to study in Austria are in the evening, maybe after dinner time. And this is also the most popular time to study around the world.
Well, but that's very late, right? I'm
I'm
asking
really
people or
surprised.
colleagues in Austria, it's really late at 9,
Mhm.
isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah, I'm surprised by that as well.
Oh, really? Okay, yeah, this is true around the world.
Yeah.
That, I think
Sabine,
it's like
I
the
guess,
after dinner.
I'm sorry,
bedtime.
I'm one of the ones that are doing studying Spanish and English. So now
Oh.
I just thought about my motivation, and one was, of course, I took English because of brain training, but also the other one was, for example, I was studying Latin before, and Latin, I really could not stand the voices. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Switch. And then I switched to the Spanish, and then I switched to the Mexican Spanish. Yeah.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
when I was just listening to that sound of that Mexican Spanish, I instantly fell in love, and I thought, all right, I'll stay with it. And so I'm sitting also around 10:30 p.m. to
Yeah.
yes, because then I have the scores of the other ones. I
Mhm.
know how hard I have to work. And well, it's just for relaxation in a way.
Yeah.
Listening to it, the stories are so fun. It is often really so cute.
I mean, you're all over this data. You are represented here on all of my slides, right?
Oh, nice.
Yeah,
That's
but family, my husband is studying Russian, my son is studying Japanese.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Okay, you're still, I wish I have, it wasn't part of this global study, so I don't have it, but I have other data I've looked at about, I keep saying, well, Asian languages are so popular, they're the fastest growing, and it's totally driven by people under 30. And so you can see by each age group, if you look at, 13 to 17, Japanese is like the 2nd or 3rd most popular language to study. If you look at 17 to 22, it's the 3rd. 22 to 25, it's 4th most popular. And so it gets further down, less popular. But among young people, Japanese and Korean, they're the ones leading the way in this change in language interest.
Yes, but I think it's also, I was traveling professionally for a long time, and I stayed really years in Japan. So I learned little Japanese, so I know it's really hard. And you have the characters. And honestly, so to say, I feel a little bit too old right now to learn all the characters, but it's really tough. And for my son, it's quite easy.
Yeah. That's a fair point. We're trying to make it easier. We've just released a new feature for Japanese because, right, the characters, we don't want the characters to be an impediment for you or anyone. And so there's new features in the Japanese course where you're doing more tracing of the characters, and you're doing more matching of the sounds and the different writing systems. Because we know it is so popular, and how many more people could we reach if we taught it, we had more tools for them. Great, so we're gonna look at some maps next, and I love a map. So here we see the most popular language studied on Duolingo in each country, and of course you see green for English, right? We know that this is the most popular language to study around the world. It's #1 in 121 countries. The #2 language is in 34 countries is Spanish, that's yellow here. #3 is French, and then you see #4 is German, Italian is #5, so on. So that's the top 10 list, English down through Chinese. But if we look at it by country, you see that there are some other surprises maybe. So Irish, after the pandemic, became the most popular language to study in Ireland. It displaced Spanish. Spanish is now #2, and now Irish is the #1 language to study there.
That's unbelievable.
Yeah.
That's really fascinating. Yeah, I'd love to know what the exact motivations were there, but that's absolutely fascinating.
Yeah, I feel like, I'm sure I've looked at this before, but I don't remember. I think school had a lot to do with this, school culture. That I think as it's become more, I mean, you could say this better than I could, but as I think as it's become more available in pop culture and in the schools, and there's more of a movement to teach it and become proficient in it, that we
maybe, yeah,
see showing up in the data. What I think is interesting is that it displaces Spanish, right? Like, of course, Spanish is taught in Irish schools too.
But it's fascinating. That's exactly it. I mean, and I wonder, was there a drive by teachers to also somehow encourage it, you know, as an additional, or I know that there were a couple of very popular, you know, viral videos around non-Irish people studying Irish as a language. People were totally fascinated by it, but it's the first thing I spotted. Very interesting. Yeah.
So something else that maybe helps us understand what could be happening there is that we see, so it doesn't show up on the map here, but for the UK, we also teach Scottish, Gaelic, and Welsh. And those are huge languages. Welsh is the fastest growing language in the UK. And so I think there's, I hope, I don't know, I'm projecting what I want it to mean, that there's like cultural movements to rethink the linguistic landscape in the places that we live. And so even if maybe I'm not from an Irish speaking family, if I'm in Ireland, you know, I hear it around, and was this lockdown an opportunity where, you know, things were so strange and things changed so quickly, like, was this an opportunity for me to do something that I'd been meaning to do, or that has kind of been in the back of my mind as I see the world around me changing?
And did Brexit have anything to do with it?
Yeah.
That would be really interesting to know if there was a surge, you know, as there's a little bit of a surge in this sort of nationalism around it. That would be fascinating too.
And could we see the opposite maybe in the UK? Do we see an increase of Spanish or German or French in the UK to correspond with that? Yeah, I don't know. Cool. We also, for the first time, see that some Asian languages have made it to #1 in some countries, right? And so just in general, we see this really interesting breadth of different languages studied. So the next map is the second most popular language in each country. Here's the first most, second most. We see an even wider variety of languages. French and Spanish and German are at the top of the list. That's not surprising, but what I think is great is the interesting growth, that it's not as dominated by the Englishes and the Spanishes and the Frenches, that there's more representation here. And so in total, there are 16 different languages that become the #2 most popular. Like I said, I just love how diverse it is. Something that's really interesting here is to look at how this has changed over time. And certainly there's more diversity, but we did a much smaller scale version of this study in 2016. And there were some things that we concluded then that now we know were wrong. So something we found in 2016 was that in South America, we saw a lot of interest in Portuguese. And we thought, well, that makes sense. Brazil is there, right? These are neighboring countries, maybe for travel. But now we don't see, poor Portuguese is not so dominant in South America. Can you guess why it would have been more popular in 2016? What sports things were happening?
I was just going to say, was it sports related? Yeah.
We think it was after, was it the World Cup there in 2014 and then the Olympics in 2016.
Okay.
We think that what our data were showing, where it was this, certainly there was an increase in Portuguese learning, but we think it was really closely tied to these cultural events, to these sporting events. And now that enough time has passed since 2016, we see maybe a return, maybe this is closer to what the normal is for South America, that there's still interest in Portuguese, certainly, right? This makes sense.
Yeah.
But Argentina's back to Italian, and we see more French being studied again.
So actually you could look at all of the last sort of Euros, maybe not this one, and the World Cups and, you know, all the soccer and really trace this development in language, because I'm sure it's also, you know, thinking about Russia and other, I'm sure that there's a strong indicator for that.
You know, we also see these small spikes. So we looked to see what happened the evening and the morning after Eurovision. And there were spikes in Italian learners, that more people were downloading, you know, because it gets people interested. You see it around, you get curious. And so we can see that spike. And again, does Eurovision change the landscape for Italian? No, but you can see that people, you know, afterwards they thought, I'm kind of interested. I thought I could. Maybe they should have been Danish. Maybe they should have been downloading for Danish, but they were downloading for Italian.
Wow. Amazing. Wow. Wonderful.
So I'm gonna, let's see what's next. Okay, so this is a quick view. There's so much information here, but I'm just gonna kind of highlight, right? So this is like a quick peek at some just random country. Oh, I'm glad I put Ireland in here. That was lucky, right? For the languages studied and how it changed. And so kind of thinking especially about Austria and your neighbors. Most of the time, I mean, right, Irish is so interesting here, but like most of the time, these are pretty predictable, the top languages in the different countries. But you can see sometimes how this changes for COVID, right? And so again, with Germany, we see that German moved down to 4th place and French moved up. Same thing in Switzerland. Oh, German moved down to 4th and Spanish moved up. Italy moved, or Italian moved down. And German and Slovakia also kind of switched places with Spanish. So we see whatever was happening, something happened that the people who were studying the language of the country, whether it was immigration or students or tourism, right, it changed overnight.
Cindy, a very interesting observation about Slovenia on the Austrian border also, that it's about top motivation is the brain. I like that, unlike
yeah.
That really got into some brain development there, right? On the
border. Okay, yeah, right. I mean, and it could be that, I don't know, y'all could tell me better, like, you know, is there something more in the pop culture that's talked about in news or on social media, but there's, I thought it was so interesting that and that's something that we don't see most places, right? You see most places, school is a really common reason to study languages, but Slovenia and Hungary too, I mean, to a lesser extent, but really interesting there. Do you want to stay and stare at this for a minute or we'll move on? I'm going to click ahead. We can go back to this.
Okay.
Yeah.
I just have a quick question.
Yeah, of course.
Based on the second most popular language spoken, so on the previous slide. So when we go to Tanzania, I'm just wondering why the second most popular language is Swahili, you know. But then I just thought about it, and I think my theory is because we have many tribes. So I think we have roughly, I don't know, if Kenya is 63 languages, I think Tanzania is more than that. So yes, so people just brushing up on their Swahili skills. I'm not sure if that's correct, but.
Oh, I don't know. But no, but that's a really interesting insight. And so that's why I think that, like, sometimes, you know, the way we see Italian is popular in Italy and German is popular in Germany, sometimes it's for really different reasons, right? The reasons someone in Germany might be studying German could be really different. Like you're saying, that there's more linguistic diversity among the different tribes in some of these places. And so the reason Swahili ends up being number 2 in Tanzania isn't the same reason why, you know, Italians, whatever the number is in Italy. Great, thanks for that insight. So here's some of my...
Sorry, we have 10 minutes left. So
yeah,
I mean, I would stay here forever, you know, just listening to you, but just want to remind those people who have other appointments.
Oh, right.
So yes.
Okay.
Yeah, you choose what you would like to share.
Yeah, let me think. I think we'll do this one quickly because I think I've said a lot of these things, right? I'm so excited by Irish being number 1 in Ireland. Swedish continues to be number 1 in Sweden. That was true in 2016 as well. I think I've said some of these things. Let's plow ahead. So I had mentioned, right, that Asian languages are really growing in popularity around the world. And so just here are some little stats about that. US Japanese is number 4 and it's the second fastest growing language, but we also see similar kinds of trends in Mexico, Brazil, and even in Austria, that year over year, if we compare 2019 to 2020, Japanese grew 42%. That is huge, right? We never see something like, you know, English is maybe at ceiling in a sense, but Japanese and Korean are growing in a really big way in Austria as well.
I wonder why. Very, very interesting.
Yeah. So here are those, the different learner motivations that I had mentioned. I think we might work through this quickly, or we'll just get to the part with my favorite factoids.
Yes.
Here's using the US as an example. This is pretty typical in a lot of Western Europe and less so in Latin America, but also that, you know, if blue is 2019, kind of a comparison time frame, green is right after the lockdown. You know, there's a big jump in school learners, big decrease in travel learners, and some other smaller changes, but lots of growth in school, lots of decrease in travel. I'm gonna skip through these. They're all pretty similar. Okay, now we'll get to my favorite facts about motivations. So something that I think is really fascinating is that I looked at the top motivations and I ranked all the countries by percent. So thinking about, well, which countries have the largest percent of learners studying for school or for work or for travel? And you get these really interesting regional trends. So when I rank all of the countries by percent of learners studying for school, most of them, although Ireland is there as well, the top 5 are from Latin America. That school is the principal reason, or the most popular of the 7 reasons to study in Latin America, or to study school for Latin American countries. If we look at the places most interested in studying for work, the pattern that emerges, the top 5 are mostly African countries. If we look at travel, we get a lot of, not only from Eastern Europe, but a lot of countries in Europe, and South Korea is there. If we look for brain training, we have this combination of countries from Africa and Southeast Asia. Culture and family are really popular in the Middle East and North Africa, and some other countries mixed in, right? This isn't strictly only Middle East and North Africa. But this was a real surprise because I wasn't expecting to see this kind of regional pattern based on interests. I don't really know what to do with this. More research needs to be done, including academic research, but this is so interesting, and it makes me wonder, like, what, I mean, we at Duolingo, but just language educators in general, how can we capitalize on this? That if we know brain training is really popular in these places, how could we tailor our curricula or the messaging around language learning, or advertising different courses and things? I think this is interesting. Yeah.
I think it's not just brain training, because if I think about my boys, I have 3 of them, so it's also quite related to social media. If you think about TikTok, for example, or Instagram, but especially in TikTok, you had loads of videos about how was quarantine in Korea, and the people, they were showing how the food was and how the sites were and everything, and it was really interesting. So you could see this also from US people that moved to Japan, for example. How is it living in Japan? And this was really nicely done. So you don't see a lot about China. And China, then it's often kind of promo video. You don't know what video this is, because they always just show neutral cooking or sunny sides or something. But the ones of Korea, they have been really interesting. With young students going there, showing their life. So yeah.
You know, I think you're exactly right. Like social media, entertainment, pop culture, that those are absolutely driving a lot of the trends that we've noticed. And I think that's why some of these trends are so global, right? It's not just, you know, Mexico that's interested in Korean culture. There's something happening about Korean media that is making it appealing to Mexico and appealing in Austria and appealing in Norway and all of these different places. I think we're more interconnected now, and I think that's something that, I mean, has been happening for a long time, but maybe happened in an intense way during the pandemic, that we had to rely on these kinds of digital connections in ways that we weren't used to. And so we were encountering more of, you know, the TikTok videos or exploring new things on Netflix, that we had more chance to rely on those connections.
And also what you said before in terms of culture, it will be very interesting how these people are defining the term culture, right? So it opens up for a very big research project.
So I know pie charts are not the best way to compare things, but to just give a quick peek into the motivations of people learning Japanese around the world and people learning Korean around the world. That's something that is really unusual, is the number of people who are selecting other. That for other languages, you know, English, Spanish, and French, it's like 6 or 7% of people pick other. But this is the #1 reason that people are studying Korean, is something we haven't captured.
Oh, maybe,
so
entertainment or...
And so I don't know, a linguist, I didn't make this, but even if I had made it, I probably would have thought of entertainment as culture. But the way I, as an academic, kind of imagine culture, meaning, and including certain things, if that's not how my learners are interpreting those words, those categories, then I'm losing something. And there is something, I've lost 1/5 of something.
Wow.
And this is just unlike other languages. So there's more work to do on the motivations there.
Yes.
Cindy, just a quick question. You mentioned that you didn't make up this particular scale, but you as a team, you work as a group of methodologists when you develop the scales to do the research. Is that correct? Is this information available for other researchers, or this is the company-based Duolingo information?
Let me skip ahead. I'm going to skip ahead so much. Some of this is available publicly, and I can share this. I think you can still see my screen. So this is the 2020 report. Let me see how much is here. So here are the motivations. So the motivation by school, by work, by travel, by brain. This is by country, not by language, but some of it could be made public. So if you had questions or you needed some particular fact, especially to support maybe something you're working on, definitely contact me.
Or we could maybe have students look at the data as well and use these data for educational purposes, if that was okay, if it's accessible to.
Exactly right. So we have 2 minutes. Let me see what. Oh no, sorry, this is old. Let's see. Oh, I'm going to go through this quickly because I want to show you one of my favorite facts. So here are the most dedicated countries, right? I told you Austria is number 5. We can also think of the hardest working countries. We conceptualized these, calculated them a little different in terms of how frequently, how regularly you study versus the quantity of information you studied. And so you can see there's plenty of overlap. Germany, Japan, and Hungary are kind of competing, and Czechia as well, competing for those top spots. You can also think of languages. We see that Esperanto and some of the Scandinavian languages are ranking top for most dedicated. They have the longest streaks. Hardest working, so the quantity of material studied. Again, like there's some kind of interesting oddities. The Welsh learners are very dedicated and very hardworking. The last little bit I'll leave you with is time of day, right? So I had told you that most of the world studies, this is kind of the second half of the day, between 9 and 11, but there are exceptions, and here are the exceptions. Monaco, Barbados, and Dominica study a little earlier in the day. France has 2 separate intervals. Their 2 most popular hours are kind of just before dinner and then after a later dinner. And we see that even later for Spain. And so I thought this was really interesting to think of like these cultures that do later evening meals or smaller evening meals, or that have a siesta that maybe, people are going back to work and completing some lessons. Maybe they have a different commuting pattern. That I love an exception to a rule.
Very interesting.
I'm going to stop there. I know we are out of time.
I'm
so grateful for all of both your questions and your insights to help me explain this data and think about global patterns.
Thank you so much, Cindy. Thank you very much. I see there's a comment in the chat. Maybe I don't know if you can read it, or I'll read it for you. Dear Cindy, I have been using a professional dictionary software on DVD or online, and there's no standardized interface to language learning, SWS, Duolingo, or competitors. And the other comment was about Slovenia and brain. They're simply doing shopping in Graz. That's not a brain issue for them.
Yeah, could be. I'm thinking about the standardized interface to language learning. I'm not sure I'm understanding there.
Well, if you're still here, Mrs. Wagner, if you want to open your microphone, feel free to just comment or ask your question a different way.
Oh, I see. Yeah, I'll look into that. I'm not familiar. I wonder if there's maybe a challenge there with Duolingo not offering. We have a dictionary, kind of like a word list on our web interface, but not the app interface. But I'm going to let me copy this. Ms. Wagner, I'm taking a screenshot in case you hear it. Okay. Yeah. Thanks.
Great.
Karen, I'm sorry. I'm just going to very briefly interrupt. I have to apologize because I should be starting a meeting now at 7, and I know the other, but I would love to stay on and I would love to continue this conversation. So it would be an absolute pleasure and delight if we could have a round number 2, because I feel there's so much more, Cindy, that I would love to hear about from you. And I have a couple of other questions, but you've given us your email address. So I just wanted to say personally, thank you so much. And I know maybe some can stay on and continue, and I don't mean to interrupt, but I just wanted to say thank you. It's been fascinating.
So nice to meet you. Yeah, maybe we do a virtual happy hour with questions sometime.
Oh, fantastic. Fantastic. Okay, I'll see you there. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Yes, I mean, the time is up, but I don't know if you have one final question, maybe a final comment, then we can close this wonderful expert talk today. I don't know if the audience, somebody, otherwise I have a question, of course.
I have a short question.
Yes.
Or suggestion. So in case, I haven't looked at the Duolingo for Swahili, but in case, I don't know, but for further projects in future, you could get in contact and we could, I could help out and work on something with you.
Yeah, okay, yeah. Please, yeah, that's great. That's great to know. Please do reach out. We have, right now we're trying to slow down the creation of new courses so that we can improve our existing ones. And so there's like, I mean, that makes me sad for like the new languages, but it means that I think courses like Swahili, we know we need to improve it quite a bit. So I think there's going to be more opportunity.
Perfect.
And I'll make sure to create this contact edit so we have everything. All right. So yes, maybe my final comment is, Cindy, since this series is called Multilingualism Matters, I would like to ask you, what does multilingualism mean to you? If you have your personal definition of what's your idea, and we can close this wonderful celebration.
I mean, I feel like there's so much I can say like on a personal level, like the family languages that I have and the way it's connected me to grandparents and parents and things. But I think given the kind of talk I gave, I'll think of it on like a global scale, that I think there's a lot of ways that people seek connection, and whether it's connection to culture, or like in the US, it happens a lot for heritage, that we think back to our family languages. And I think it was something that people really leaned on during the pandemic, that we needed to feel more connected to the world and to other people, and that language learning gave us a way to connect, whether it was through K-pop or our community languages, or feeling close to friends on the other side of the world. Language is about connecting.
Wonderful. I love that. Thank you very much, Cindy. So thank you everyone for joining this talk. It will be available on YouTube soon. Thank you, Cindy, for your generosity, for your time. It was wonderful. It was very interesting. And I'll get in touch for a second run, maybe sooner or later. And I just want to remind everyone, we're going to have a summer break with this SIETAR Austria talks, and we're going to see each other again in October, so really in autumn. And the first talk for October will be about language acquisition, so how children learn language, acquire or learn, let's see, languages. So I'm really looking forward for that. Thank you, everyone. I'm going to say arrivederci, buona serata, adios, hasta luego, ciao, ciao.
Bye-bye, thank you very much.
Bye-bye, thank you.